Hey, welcome to the first episode of Sound Scene. Glad you could join us. I'm really stoked to be kicking things off by speaking to the talented Amanda Krieg Thomas. Amanda's a music supervisor based in LA and head of the music supervision company that she started called Yay Team Productions, and a little bit of an idol for me. Amanda's had a nice career journey, which we'll get into a bit later, but she started out working for a music attorney at Lionsgate and sniffed out a music supervision opportunity and just ran with it. She was a music coordinator on Pitch Perfect, One Born Every Minute, and MasterChef before music supervising the likes of American Horror Story, The Prom, and The Assassination of Gianni Versace. She's also written this great book called Thinking in Sync, a primer on the mind of a music supervisor, which is out now on Amazon. But I'm really excited to talk to Amanda about her work on the series Pose. Now, if you haven't seen it, I implore you to. Pose is a snapshot of ball culture and is inspired by the iconic documentary Paris is Burning, which despite its name is set in New York City during the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And there's just this really hectic melting pot going on. So firstly, you've got this gaudy Trump era, new money, like Wall Street luxury and skyscraper / suburbia life, which is emblematic of the more, vacuous side of the American dream, purported American dream. And then running corollary to this world, there's the city's outcasts and the marginalized who are just fighting, not with each other, but fighting financial destitution, racial tension, homophobia, and transphobia, not to mention the debilitating HIV/AIDS epidemic, which was at its zenith at the time. These are people often Black or Latino LGBT who have been rejected by their families, but kind of find a family with each other. And they live in these houses that became the cornerstones of this incredible ball culture scene, created in the face of just really confronting oppression. But by night, they'd put on these balls and dress to the absolute nines and hold these clandestine competitions as this defiant movement of self-expression and revelry and a space within which to be free in a world where they were denied this. They flip between these notions of gender, embracing masculinity and femininity and highlighting the fluidity of it all. And of course, the music they walk to, it slaps so hard. Everything from Madonna to Whitney, Diana Ross to Shaka Khan, Sade to Frankie Knuckles. It's like a snapshot of the time and really dives into the disco and house music which underpinned ball culture. So obviously we're kind of going to get into all of that. So without further ado, I guess, let's do just that and get into it. Sounds Scene. Hello there. Welcome to Sound Scene, a podcast about how music supervisors use music to tell visual stories. Amanda, hi, and thanks for coming on Sound Scene for what is our first episode.
Oh, so exciting. I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So while I've given a rather unqualified definition of a music supervisor, you've quite literally written the book on it. We can chat about said book later, but do you mind giving us an elevator pitch definition of what music supervision is and what a music supervisor does?
Yeah, so music supervision in a very broad sense, we oversee all music elements of a film in various ways. That can stretch from hiring the composer, hiring music editor, hiring production people on set, to working on recordings for set or for just original songs, to picking songs for other scenes, or sending song ideas to editors or producers, to having, broad creative conversations about what the sound of the show should be, to actually executing that in terms of clearances, in terms of licensing, paperwork, fees, all of that type of stuff. It's yeah, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Just we sort of touch and oversee, or are exposed to every musical component on a film or a television show.
Brilliant. Thank you. Eloquent, articulate. I love it. So let's jump into it. Today we're talking about Pose, and Amanda, I want to say thank you, because the music in Pose slaps.
Thank you.
Shaka Khan and Evelyn Champagne King, Whitney, Kate Bush, Donna Summer. It's such an energy, and I'm always voguing in the house. And it's not just that vibey music that makes this show so great. So before we get into the music, I wanted to ask you, like, Pose really opens up on issues around race and class, gender and sexuality, and it seems to truly be of the zeitgeist now. So what is it about Pose that makes it this not just relevant but quite an important cultural piece at the moment?
Well, when I first read the script of Pose very early on, it was right when a lot of TV shows were out, where a lot of prestige TV featured really like unlikable people in really difficult situations. And it was, really incredible storytelling, but it kind of left you feeling really heavy and really just down. And I remember saying to my husband, I was like, what is is there an equivalent of this, the prestige TV, where it like leaves you feeling really uplifted? And then I read the script of Pose, and I remember saying to him, I was like, I think this is it. I think this is the answer to that, where it's just incredible storytelling. It's characters you root for, and they go through hard stuff because that's sort of the nature of the story and the characters and the time period. But it doesn't dwell in the negative stuff. It doesn't, we are very much in the AIDS crisis, and there were some really heartbreaking moments, but the show more focuses on the strength in these characters and how they uplift themselves in the face of this hardship. And what's the other brilliant thing about it too, and because of that, kind of hand in hand, is that the storytelling is really universal. It's about family. It's about people taking care of each other. And, I think another sort of very telling thing is, I work on a lot of shows. The only one both of my parents love is Pose. And these are, boomers who grew up on the East Coast, boomers who go to their country club, who, like, they're not the demographic for Pose, but the way they talk to me about it, it's like, it transcends. The storytelling is so universal. It just, you don't, on paper, I feel like it reads like something potentially niche, but how they've executed it is something completely universal.
That's so beautiful. And you're so right. Like it's almost, with, I guess, woke, liberal, kind of cosmopolitan people, it's almost a given that you would love this show. But the fact that it is, as you say, just transcending and appealing to your boomer parents, for example, is kind of amazing.
Yeah. It's really, and like, I'll be like, did you watch The Americans? They're like, American Crime Story. And they're like, And Pose, they're like, oh my God, I can't wait to like Blanca and Angel and Electra. I just love like the way like my dad talks about it. I'm just sort of like, it's always, I love it. I love it every time.
That's so sweet. And I imagine they're bopping to the music, and it plays such a central role to Pose, but just so much of Ryan Murphy's work, from Glee to his adaptation of Broadway's The Prom, the latter of which you also did the music supervision for. And in Pose, it's centered around New York's fascinating and incredible ball culture. So I'm curious, Amanda, how much of the music is written into the script, and how much of it are you called onto for for music supervision or creative input. So, for example, and for those listening who love this show, we have Ain't Nobody by Shaka Khan or Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody for Damon's audition for dance school. I can't imagine those scenes with any other songs. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan has incredible musical taste and incredible musical vision. And because of that, you kind of can't work on those projects unless you are musical and in some way. And so, major credit goes to Ryan for a lot of the song picks, as well as Alexis Martin Woodall, who's the president of Ryan Murphy Productions, who also has a huge hand in music. Like there's such a love for music, and especially I will say a love for music from this era, that I think it just like everybody got in it on Pose. And so and similarly, what I also think, I always love sort of saying about it is Pose has like, Stephen Canals, Janet Mock, Our Lady J, they're like queer, Latinx, trans, Janet and Our Lady J are trans women, like icons, and they're also really contributing to the music because they lived in this time period. And Stephen grew up in New York. And like that, I think, is what makes the show feel so authentic and so special, is that we honor it's like, and for me, like, I don't need to pick every song. Like, for me, it's just exciting to be a part of making things happen. And so a lot of those big moments are scripted. They are coming from Ryan or Alexis or Janet or Steven. And, we have had to jump through some hoops of fire making those happen. But because like when you know where the pick is coming from, you're like, yeah, I'm going to jump through all the hoops of fire to get you that song. And then there are certainly certain things that we've like pitched creatively over the years. A lot of the time, for the most part, a lot of things playing in the background in scenes is also period authentic music, but just by no one you've ever heard of. And so that's kind of where we come in, is like filling out the tapestry of the world of, like what's playing, while they're in the ball, but they're in the hallway talking, or like what's coming out of the gay club as they walk by. And so that's all stuff coming from us. That's all us saying, like, reaching out to the people we know, sort of digging deep and being like, okay, we're looking for real stuff from, Pose, I think, started in 1987 year-wise, and then now we're in the early 90s. So it's like, okay, like, music evolves, and like the locations we're at evolve. And so we're constantly like, we're the ones sort of behind the scenes on the creative side being like, okay, like, is this an authentic spot? Is this not? Usually if it's not, it's like really deep, like it's like we're thumping a bass in the background, like, but anytime you're hearing a vocal, it's going to be something that is from the period actually. And so that's kind of where we kind of coming in to fill in that world. And then really just sort of like making dreams come true. And yeah, there, like I said, there have been a couple spots where we have kind of pitched on creatively and got some bigger songs in, but when you're working on shows that are about a really specific community, like, I very much see us as like, we're here to amplify and elevate and make dreams make dreams come true. And Pose is like very much one of those shows for sure.
Yeah, that's so nice, and so beautiful how the cast was kind of involved in that collaborative approach as well. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on the like incredible cabaret scenes with performances from different cast members. Can you explain how all of that comes together? I imagine after Glee days and everything that the Ryan Murphy productions have done, that it's a well-oiled machine by now, but it'd be great to understand kind of what goes into those moments, like the licensing and the clearance, the live performance, lip syncing, if anything, any other things that you would know?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Like, because Glee was a music show, it was a differently oiled machine, if that makes sense. Like there was a on staff music producer and an on staff, like it was like there was a machine. But when all of these shows now, like they aren't musical, I'm air quoting, like they aren't technically musical shows. So I'm kind of the machine. And so, as with a lot of things, like the creative really comes from Ryan, it comes from Alexis. And so that's kind of where it starts. Then we go to pursue the clearance, of course. We get a quote, and then it's sort of like, how do we execute this? And it's all it's very scene dependent. Like, okay, what kind of arrangement do you want, how many people do you want to see on camera, and should it be, with Ryan, a lot of the times, like he just knows, he's like, this is what it needs to be, it needs to look like this. And so a lot of times, like, we get the directive, it's like, this is the song, this is what I needed to do, and then it's like, go make it happen. And usually if there's a song, there's something that he loves about the original version. So it's like, okay, how do you capture that with, like, okay, with the practicality of it all, and like, okay, we're in the AIDS cabaret, we can't put like a full orchestra, like how do we sort of calibrate that? And so then I will engage with a music producer. We've used different people for different things. Like in general, I kind of try to match people, like with skill set, like match skill sets with needs. Um, and so like and so we use this really great guy who comes from Broadway, James Sampliner, for season 2 and all of those songs, because a lot of those were actually, are Broadway songs. And so it's working with that producer to sort of get, like, do the demos, what do they need, supporting them, like, okay, like, do you need a pianist to come in, do we need to get musicians in the room, is this something that you can do using Pro Tools and samples or whatever,
Right.
just to get us to that hurdle. And then I'm the one scheduling all the cast pre-records for season 2. We had nearly every one of our main actors in, to record parts on all of those songs. I try to do like one pass before it goes to like Ryan and Alexis for them to listen to. And yeah, and then from there, once everything, it's all like an approval process. It's getting it to that and then getting it to cast so they can practice lip syncing, and then getting everything to production so they have it ready. And for that, increasingly, I have gotten more involved in the, like, okay, what do you need on camera? So, I'll work with a music contractor who has just like a Rolodex of musicians. I mean, this was all before the time of COVID, which has made everything more complicated and more communication and more legwork and scheduling, but so I'm sort of part of that process as well, and like putting photos in front of Ryan or whoever's directing and saying, like, is this what you want? Is this the look for the band, and all of that stuff. And then, for something like the Prom, or if like Pro shoots in New York,
Right.
and, I always laugh that like the season 2, AIDS cabaret was so intense. There were, I think, like 5 different numbers. We were doing like a week's worth of pre-records with cast. And normally I'd love to go out for it, but that was all happening right as I was literally delivering my first child. And so I couldn't get on a plane. But for things shooting here, I would then also be on set watching lip sync. And then also, like, there are often things that come up, like maybe an actor can't really get lip sync right on one phrase, or in the moment they're like, they find something in the acting that's different, that's on the track. And so am there to sort of just be that through line from start to finish of the process for those on cameras. And I think every production is a little different, and I know different supervisors have different processes for this, but that's sort of, again, in the spirit of, I'm, as the music supervisor, I'm actually one of very few people in an ideal scenario that comes in pre-production on the script stage, has stuff to do in production on certain things, and then finishes things out in post. And Prom is a great example. Like, we were on the mix stage for the end of Prom, like they're finishing the mix of the movie. I was watching, some of it, and I was standing with the sound mixer who just comes in this very last phase. And he looked at me and he was like, "Were you on set when they shot this?" And I was like, "I was in the recording studio when they recorded this. I was on set when they shot this. And now, yes, I'm standing here with you as we finish the film." But it was just sort of this funny moment of like, oh, wow, like different people come in different moments. And I've been there, like I was doing things for this one scene, like before this ever got to this person. But yeah, so, going back to Pose, that's sort of like the arc of my work when it comes to on-camera performances. It's still fulfilling the vision, because at the end of the day, like, I send it to Ryan and I pray for the approved email.
For sure. And thank you for like walking us through all those different elements. And to what that guy kind of commented on, saying, oh, like, were you there when this was recorded? And you kind of had to explain that you were on from the start. Is that, would you say, like a historical perception of music supervision and music supervisors as being kind of a post-production thing?
Yeah, for sure. Right. And on a lot of projects, that is still the case. I mean, I've done more than one independent film where they bring someone on in post. But, I think a lot of people sort of forget about the on-camera element, because there are a lot of projects that don't have people doing AIDS cabarets and don't have bands on camera. And that's just like not a thing. And I certainly have projects too that, like, there's maybe one scene in a season that calls for a band, but the rest of it doesn't really call for any music in production.
Yeah.
And so it is sort of, you could feasibly be a music supervisor and never have to do this, or really rarely have to do this.
Yeah.
But for me, in a professional sense, I would get nervous, because a lot of times people will have people like singing along to the radio, or whistling, or humming, or like improvising, quoting lyrics. Like, and then, if you're doing an independent film, you're watching that and you're like, that's, X amount of money. And I hope you filmed that scene without them doing that. Like, and a lot of times they haven't.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a stitch in time saves nine if you're there from the onset kind of thing.
Exactly. Because, I always say that stuff never in like a derogatory sense, because like I still find that stuff really interesting and fascinating. Like, I'm doing something right now where like we had to like research and pre-clear Hebrew prayers. Like, there's so many things that people don't consider music, but it is music.
Yeah.
And I find it like, it stuns and surprises me regularly. And I've been doing this for like 12 years. So, that's why I'm always like, no, you guys, seriously, like, I find it interesting and stressful when you're in that situation. But like, yeah, that's why we like to be on early as possible, to kind of catch those things before they become, $40,000 problems or more.
Right. So technical and like executionary stuff, but then also creative stuff as well, which is kind of cool to see both of those.
Yeah, and for sure, creative, where sometimes they're like, we need a band, and you're pitching bands, and what song is that band? So there's a creative component to it too, but those people who have an on-camera band, they know they need that help, but it's often the people who don't think they need that help, where you're like,
that need that help.
You need that help.
Right. Pose is set in such a historically pivotal time, as you've alluded to. Like, there's this highly capitalist kind of sector of society that is buttressed by finance and very individualistic ideals, while at the same time there are these people desperate for community, for love, and for freedom of expression. And there's so many important themes that Pose covers. So the job of music is really not as simple as just, clearing and placing the groovy bops from that era. Like, what, Amanda, do you think the role of music is in this series? Like, not to get too philosophical, but yeah.
Well, I think kind of going back to this idea that like at the end of the day, Pose is a really optimistic show, and music plays a big part of that. And one of the things that I really want to give Alexis Martin Woodall credit is that like, there's a lot of house music from that era. And I think that that has been used and it's been used to great effect. But I think where she and Ryan are really strong at is going with feeling, and like this is what the song needs to do in a positive way. Like the music really, I think, speaks to the idea that yes, it's of a period that is a very specific period in a community that's very specific, but like going with the songs of that era that speak more to that fun, optimistic, like Mariah and Whitney and like Pebbles and Jodie Watley, that's like, and Janet Jack, like the side of pop music from that era that just makes you smile. They're just great songs.
Yeah.
Like, where we use many Donna, some Ryan loves Donna, like it's like Undeniable makes you smile. Dinah Ross, like you can't not smile when you listen to that music and those songs. And that, I think the music really it really sort of like gives you that optimism, and it could so easily, it gives you the authenticity to the period. I think that's part A, but I think the bigger purpose of it is serving good feelings and like making you want to be at the balls, and like showcasing the really fun and just the really fun and warm and inclusive side of these balls and this community.
Totally. And like the music in general kind of, as you say, just tilts heavily towards like these upbeat, optimistic and happy kind of vibes. And what I noticed that also is that there is score, and that would often soundtrack the scenes at home or in the hospital, maybe a bit more like emotionally arresting. And then, to your point, kind of these really great uplifting songs were kind of saved for the balls, and you knew they were coming, so you kind of get giddy and excited for like inevitably in the episode when like the ball is going to happen, and you're like, okay, what are we going to hear, and like what's going to happen, and almost I guess that like really reflected what this was to them at the time. Like it was very much this evening where they could just be completely, which is really nice.
Yeah. And just, I mean, it's also just great eras of music. I mean, the late 80s, very mid to late 80s, early 90s. It's like every season is just fun to be like, oh, Buffalo Stance was out at this point, and like, oh, like, this was out at this point. Madonna's Vogue, it was out at this point, and like that's like when as the years go by, you're like, oh man, that song.
Yeah, yes. That's so good. Yeah, it's all been downhill from there.
All been downhill.
So, I mean, we've just spoken about a lot of it, but a lot of the music is, exactly from that era, very accurate. And some of it is, as you mentioned, like quite deep cuts from the ball culture scene. Have you had any interesting clearance or licensing moments?
Oh, so many
because of that.
So many. I'm trying to think of what the best ones. We've had a lot of really interesting clearance moments on Pose, and there's one I always talk about because I'll never forget it. For season 1, there was a Grace Jones song. I've seen that face before that Ryan desperately wanted, and she's a very difficult clear, and it took 6 months of us chasing down her camp, and it was like I love telling it because it's a testament to how creative you kind of sometimes have to get when you're clearing songs, because a lot of people are just like, oh, I just need a template, and then I just need to figure out who I sent that template to. And there's months and months of getting no response from the label, which was very normal. And so we did some digging, and the only other contact we could find for her was her modeling agent. And in that 6 months, the Pose press shots first came out, and they were just beautiful, like bright colors, feathers,
Wow.
makeup. It was just gorgeous. And I was just like, let's try it. So we cold emailed her modeling agent, and we're just like, we know you're not the person to clear this, but we're trying to get a hold of Grace, and here are the press shots. We like truly believe this is something that she would want to be involved in. It's going to be really special, and it feels right up her alley. And we like talked all about the message of the show. And after several follow-ups, I'm on the plane with Grace. She's into it. We're going to connect you with the right person who can approve this for you. And we got the song approved. And that was one. And then I'm also really especially proud of Madonna's Vogue. And she's also, with these big artists, like she's particular about where her music goes. And she's also like still a very active celebrity. And it can be hard to get a hold of those people, even for their own team. So in the call I got from Alexis and Ryan was basically like, this song, we haven't written anything yet. This song is going to figure prominently thematically in season 2. We need to get it cleared before we write anything, which is challenging because usually you need a scene description to clear a song. You need to know how it's going to be used, because they want to say, they want to see like, how is my song going to be used here? And so I had some phone calls with her people, her label and publisher, and I wrote a very long email about the, just like the broad strokes, like what the season was going to generally be about, how the song would figure into the season. And it took a little bit, but then we got the email back that it's like, Madonna is interested. You do need to let us know when it's written so we can see how it's going to be used. But she is on board with this concept. She is aware and on board with like the song being used in this way in this season. And it was just sort of like a sigh of relief. There was still like a little bit of anxiety each time we had to go back to her camp, because it was used, I think, 2 or 3 times, and we had to go back every time and just be like, hey, it's appearing here. Here's the scene.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. But it was, again, it was just sort of an example that like, if you think that all you're going to do is send a template, like you're not going to get the answers you want. And those were 2 of several. And, there were other ones where it was like challenging tracking down who owns it and finding out like, with that type of music in that era, there were like remixes upon remixes. There's like the 7-inch and the extended cut and the like, and because our producers are very specific, a lot of times we would be like, they want to use this song, it has to be this version. And that required some creativity.
Yeah,
for sure.
Wow, no, that's really, really interesting. And I just kind of was thinking of just the licensing and the clearance side of it being difficult to track down, but also these people were so, especially Madonna was such a part of the ball culture, so it was obviously something that she really wanted to make sure was being done right.
Yeah, and you just never know different people's like what's going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of stuff that you really can't know until you kind of go under the hood. So, we get asked all the time by producers, are like, is this clear? Is this going to be fine? Like, how much is this? And you're like,
Right.
In a vacuum, like, yes, but, maybe this person hates this one thing. I was trying to clear someone once, and I was told that a certain band never approves anything unless it's like hockey or animation.
Yeah.
Like you would never know that unless you went down the road to actually try and clear the song. And it's amazing how often even the labels and publishers who are pitching songs and doing the clearances, they don't know this stuff until they go to try to clear a song. And they're told by their client, like, oh, you know, for whatever reason, we don't want to do this. Like, you know, it's, and we as supervisors are contending with all of that on our side and like managing that with our showrunners who kind of like do and don't care about all the backstory, you know, like they just want to know, is it going to clear?
They want the yes.
Yeah. They're like, am I going to get my song? And you want to be like, well, it's like, you know, like we're, anyway, song clearance.
Yeah.
Always exciting.
Nice. And I guess I'm going to spend my evening now cross-referencing the Mighty Ducks with all Disney to find out what song is used in both, so I can figure out who that band
exactly.
is.
Yeah.
So I'll see you in a bit. So yeah, season 3, imminent in May. You said you couldn't say much, but what can we expect music-wise from season 3 of Pose?
A lot of music. I think a lot of music, and you know, it's the series finale, so it's I think people can expect a appropriate send-off to these characters that hopefully people have fallen in love with over the past few seasons, you know, and yeah, it's just really special. Like I it's definitely the season I'm most proud of for the work I've done and my involvement in it. And I think everybody should be really proud. Like it's just a really special season of television and I hope people watch it.
Yeah, moving away from Pose and into your music supervision career more broadly, you've worked on a number of Ryan Murphy's productions, as well as Pose. You've done American Horror Story, Ratchet, The Prom. How did this come about? I'd love to hear about your relationship with the production team. You've already alluded to that, but how that relationship has kind of evolved into something that seems to go from one production to the next and from strength to strength.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved in a really awesome way. Like it's like very much become a family. Like when you're in the trenches, project after project, it's just sort of like forms a bond like that. And how it kind of came to be, it was really a kind of cool timing, and I feel really, really lucky. And so there are many ways to get into music supervision, and one of them, and the way that I ended up kind of going down, is sort of the apprenticeship route. Like I worked under a lot of different people, starting with a music attorney, and then, you know, film music people, independent supervisors, and different companies, bounced around, a lot of lateral moves. And I kind of found myself working for PJ Bloom, who is a very well-known music supervisor, and he did Glee, he did Nip Tuck with Ryan. Like he was Ryan's guy for a very long time. And so I started working at the company. He was a partner at Neophonic, and I was working directly under him. And that's when I first started working on the project. So I was working with him on American Crime Story, The People vs. OJ, Feud, Scream Queens, a couple seasons of American Horror Story. So that's kind of where I started kind of getting to know the people on the team. And then after about 2 years, PJ decided, you know, he'd been doing music supervision for like 20 some odd years. And he took a step back and started working at Warner Brothers Records, where he still is to this day. We talk all the time. And it was this very terrifying moment because he was such a great mentor and boss, and we worked really well together, where he kind of sat me down and he was like, I'm leaving and I'm going to talk to the producers about, and it wasn't just the Ryan Murphy shows. There was a couple other projects we were working on together as well. He's like, but I'm going to talk to everybody and tell them that they should just keep working with you. And he had, you know, teed it up really well in the sense that like I was doing a lot of, you know, like I was very present. Like I wasn't kind of just like working for him. Like they knew who I was. I was very vocal in conversations, doing a lot of creative work, all the stuff. And my heart dropped out a little bit and I was like, oh my God, okay. And hopefully this works. Hopefully they agree with him. And um, it ended up being really a smooth transition. And I really do give a lot of credit to Alexis, who I keep mentioning, who, she runs a lot of the day to day, and she was the one who kind of gave the okay and said like, okay, yeah, we'll take it. We'll take a chance on this person. And I definitely supervised things before that. It wasn't, I wasn't like totally, I'd been doing it at that point for like 9 years, working under different people, doing stuff on my own. Like it wasn't, just nothing, but it was certainly a very big jump. It just kind of all worked out, and it was kind of at a time where Glee had ended, a lot of new projects were starting, like the Crime Story, the second season of Crime Story, Versace was starting, Horror Story was starting, but then like it from there, like that was right when Pose, 911, like a lot of these really new projects were kind of all like really ramping up. And uh it's just the relationship has really just grown, and that was now like almost 3 years ago, and the trust has grown with every season, and it's just been a really, really awesome relationship. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of how it came about.
Wow, really nice. And I mean, it brings me into my next question. And again, given it's the first episode of Sound Scene, it'd be great to understand the components that you feel are the most important now that you've been in it for some time, as you said, to being a music supervisor. So simply put, what do you need to know, and what skills do you need to have?
It's a really good question. For me, you have to absolutely be incredibly organized. You have to be able to know, like you have to check your details, cross T's, dot I's, all the 9 yards, because that's what people are really looking to you to be able to do, and clearance stuff. And kind of going back to what we were saying, like they just like they want you to say like, can I have my song I want? And then kind of along with that, like people skills are absolutely critical. And I think that is really what has helped me along the way. And very early on in projects, you kind of have to sort of assess, like, who am I dealing with? Like, who's the main musical voice in the room? Who's the main financial person? Who are going to be the allies to your messaging? And that is so critical, and I mean much more important, honestly, than any music taste,
Right.
is knowing how to sort of navigate the personalities to like not I don't want to say get what you want, but to like, okay, who's going to be the say so for finances, who's going to be the say so for creative, like those are the two big ones.
Yeah.
Like you have to know, like if you're going over budget, who do you tell so that it can get handled and or you're covered.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you're the keeper. You're kind of like a teller at the bank, but you're not the bank. So like, if your manager wants to spend a bunch of money, you can't be like, if meaning like your producer is like, I feel passionately about this and I want to do this, then you're like, okay, like it's, and you have to know how to say yes, no, in a way that appeases all the parties that you're kind of dealing with, because you're dealing with the producers, you're dealing with the studio, you're dealing with all of this stuff. And the other kind of really big skill that I think has really helped me is this idea that nobody likes being blindsided with information, specifically financial, but like all information. And that sort of thought kind of really informs a lot of my communication. And I think that is something that producers across the board, no matter what it is, really appreciate. And kind of having that as sort of a guiding principle of like, nobody likes being blindsided has really, I think, helped me grow, keep relationships, but also grow relationships and have people coming back. It's a very personal person, people related business, and having a decent grasp of that. And it's not to say I don't mess things up every day and like, struggle through and be like, am I doing this right? But I feel like I do have a fairly good grasp of that, and I think that's really helped.
Totally. And for those listening who kind of want to be a music supervisor, how can you be self-sufficient and learn about, say, licensing and clearance specifically, as the legal side of the job seems to be one of these trickier areas?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. There are some classes, there are some books to read. You do learn so much of it in the moment. And, if you've got a local university wherever you are, if they've got a film program, offer to, practice some clearances. I would maybe not be like, let me pick music for your project. I would be like, hey, if there's a song that you love, like, let me try to help you get it. That's kind of how I started doing, they weren't meaningful in the sense that I got jobs from them, but they were meaningful in the or that they paid me money, but they were meaningful in the sense that it was really good practice for me to do indie film. Like I knew like friends of friends, and they were like, I would get emails being like, I hear you do music, I'm doing this film. And then like something else I got was through like a women in film message board. And it was like putting it out there as much as possible. And then, if you do get a bite from something like that, just then doing your research from there, like make sure you're not missing details on a clearance and making, and that's a little bit tougher because you're like, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's easy to miss things. That's where it's like I started off working for a music attorney, and it was so helpful because, again, a lot of times people are just like, I love the song, I want it. And if you can make that happen, then like, great. And so it was learning clearance was so critical for my first job. And it also really helped me in the sense that when I then did indies, I had people I could be like, hey, can you just look this over? And like, am I missing anything? Is there anything weird about this? And, usually there's not too much, but like, that I ended up having sort of a, like very early on, like a sounding board in terms of the legal stuff. And that was critical because that's really what I think separates people out, is like the understanding of that side of things. Like anybody can make a cool playlist, but if you knowing how to actually deliver the songs in a way where someone's not going to get sued later down the road is kind of like the first step to becoming an actual like valued, like a real music supervisor, frankly. And then also I would say admin skills though are really, really critical. Like a lot of people are looking, if you're going the admin like I did, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for someone to walk in the room for an interview and be like, can I show you my spreadsheet? You've never seen anything more beautiful. And like, I know how to write a competent email. I know how to like organize, let me organize your folders. I know how to like keep people, like that, and a lot of people get into music supervision because they're musicians, and people are like, yeah, I know how to like do things in Pro Tools, and that's cool and helpful. But like, if I, Amanda, personally am hiring someone, I'm looking for someone who's going to be really organized and not someone who just loves music and like all of that stuff. I think like having very strong admin skills is really important and really transferable.
Got it. So two people come in to an interview, one's got a Grammy and the other one can do really good VLOOKUPs on Excel. You're going for the latter.
Yeah, 100%.
Nice.
That helps me, that helps. Yeah. That helps me out.
Yeah, totally. No, that was a great answer. Yeah. You also, and I'm trying to figure out how you found the time to do this, but you went and wrote this great book, Thinking in Sync, a primer on the mind of a music supervisor. I read it, and And while it was helpful for someone like me who kind of is aspiring to be a music supervisor, I felt it was definitely more directed towards an artist or a musician who wants to get their music in front of someone like you. Was this kind of an industry plea? Do you feel like there is this big education piece that needs to be done on music supervision, music supervisors, and is this something that needs to be done more in film and TV or in music, in the music industry?
I think both. I think they're two different things. So like the book came about, I actually started writing that probably in 2011 or 2012, a long time ago. And it came before I certainly felt qualified at all as a music supervisor, truly. And it came from the fact that like we like music supervisors, I always sort of laugh. I'm like, I feel like people think they know how many emails we get a day from people pitching music, but they don't really know. It's like, it's truly hundreds.
Wow.
And it came from me just being like, just seeing the same mistakes over and over again. And then, it's a very close-knit community. So we all talk and we've all, at that point I had been on a few panels with peers and stuff. And it was just like, we'd all talk about the same things. So we'd be like, oh man, people don't know how to use metadata. And like, oh, they attach things. It was just like really basic things. And, we'd go out looking for an instrumental and someone would be like, oh, let me go check with the artist if they have that. And the same person would then turn around and be like, do you have anything? Like, do you have anything for us? Like, do you have anything following up on that? Just the same mistakes would happen over and over again, constantly. And those are the emails we frankly get most bombarded with, not so much people who want to be music supervisors, although that has increased, but it's like one interested music supervisor email for every 100 licensing people wanting to get their music into film and TV. And that's really where like the genesis of it started. And then it sort of evolved as I went. And then I was sort of like, well, if I'm going to tell people this, they should probably know why. Then I would have like a pitching person reaching out and they'll be like, this person's like, they don't have access. It's really hard. It'll take a few days. And I would just be like, I don't have time to wait a few days. You're going to lose the sync. Then I was sort of like, then again, that led to like, maybe if they knew why, because of our because we're on a schedule, because we're getting demands from our showrunner, from our editors. It's like, we're trying to solve a problem. And I also don't always have time to respond to, again, all the many people who ask questions or who want feedback or this. And I was just sort of like, let me just put it all in one place. So if people have, like, here it is. As far as music supervision, I do think there is still a lack of education about what a music supervisor does. And I think I'll rephrase this to say there's a lack in interest in education about what a music supervisor actually does. The Guild is doing really, really fantastic work in putting information in, like creating panels and trying to put information out there, but it's not being received by the people who need it most, which is our producers, our showrunners, like studios and all of that. Because it's pretty incredible. Like, you'd think that a lot of people in film and TV studio music departments understand. The vast majority of those people have never been independent music supervisors. So they don't quite understand they don't have the perspective. I mean, they have a general broad sense, but I have friends who've worked in studios who are like, oh, I've never had to clear a song because we have an in-house team for that. I've never been the one to send a quote. I've never had to send a quote request myself. It's not that they don't understand music. It's just, I think, a different thing if you've never been in the trench. There are some people who do really value the job and understand really the scope of it, but it's, I'm kind of always amazed how sometimes like my fee is determined by the studio, and sometimes my showrunners don't really even know what fee I end up with. And I'm like,
Right. Yeah.
so you're asking me to do XYZ and you have no idea what I'm being paid for this, or like a very rough sense. And so that I think is tough. And I don't know what the answer is like, how do you educate people who aren't super interested in being educated? Because in their mind, it's like, and like doing my job right is kind of like not showing them how hard it was, is making it seem easy.
Right.
You know, I myself have done panels at South by for filmmakers to be like, you need a music supervisor and here's how they can help. And they're like not super well attended, because I think people just are like, whatever, you know, I just pick a song I want and send a template. Like, what do I need to know? What else is there to know?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you kind of break that misconception when people don't show up? And so, yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's sort of an ongoing struggle for music supervisors, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and ultimately that's what I want to do with this, is to just like explore a project or a film or a series or something, but specifically from that perspective of a music supervisor, and try and make that in my kind of little way just a bit more known and a bit more available, and you know, everyone can listen to a podcast.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Hey, Amanda, thanks so much. I really enjoyed our chat and I really appreciate your time. Can you tell us when does Pose have a date in May?
I think it's May 2nd. Let me Google it real quick because I should probably get it right. May 2nd. Pose season 3 will premiere on May 2nd, and it will be amazing.
Nice one. Thank you so much. Hey, have a good day, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. That was so fun.
So that was that. As Amanda said, the third and final season of Pose is airing May 2nd. It's on BBC iPlayer and Netflix in the UK. It was first on the FX network in the US. A bit of Googling will get you to wherever you need to watch it. Next episode is about the Adam Curtis documentary films. And I'm speaking with Gavin Miller, who both music supervised and contributed his own music to them. If you haven't seen them, it's kind of like David Attenborough narrating a very kind of dark human history. Maybe instead of animals fucking and killing each other, it's about humans fucking and killing each other. There's some really great music in there: Burial, Aphex Twin, Harold Budd, and more. So yeah, it's going to be good. All right, bye now.
Sounds